Before we begin today's conversation, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
My name is Ray and I'm the treasurer of the Port Street High School SRC. I'm joined by Daniel, who is the secretary. Today we'll be in conversation with Natalie Lang, who is the secretary of the New South Wales and ACT branch of the Australian Services Union.
Natalie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the role that you perform?
Great. Thank you, Daniel and Ray, for having us be part of this conversation today. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. I'm calling in from my home in the Blue Mountains, so I'm on Darug and Gundungurra land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name's Natalie Lang, and I have the privilege to get to be the Secretary of the Australian Services Union in New South Wales and the ACT. So we're an amalgamated union. We represent workers across a whole host of different industries, from water utilities, public transport, Qantas aviation, the private sector, information technology, and the biggest part of our membership working community and disability services. So services like women's refuges, youth services, homelessness services, really important workers right across the spectrum who do amazing things. And we're very fortunate to get to be a growing union, and we support our members every day to have the best possible rights and conditions at work, and to make sure that our society is one that is fair and just for every single person, and that one's right to justice and services and dignity is not based on their postcode or their income, but is fair and that is equitable for every single member of our community. So that's a bit about what we do.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And, I think we'd all, and I speak for everyone, running this event and listening to this interview, that we're so glad and grateful to have you here, because I think it's really important just to kind of, think about all the different potential future career options and, everything that people can do to make change in the world. And I think, just looking a little bit at what you've done in your community, for me, I was really a little bit, astounded at all the work that you've done. And I think it's really amazing, some of the changes that you've made. So we'll hop right into the questions. So Natalie, you were involved in the ASU's Equal Pay Campaign, which in 2012 achieved wage increases for a wide range of community services across the country and workers in that industry. And so, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has really shone a light on the vital role that those workers play in assisting the most vulnerable in our communities. Yet we often see their work being undervalued and underpaid. Most recently, we saw Sydney Water, which was forced to backflip on its decision to offer workers a 1% pay rise after the Berejiklian government announced a 2.5% pay rise across the board for public sector wages. Do you think that the pandemic has strengthened our societal appreciation for community service workers and the vital role that they play in our community? And what advice would you give to young people who are kind of looking to pursue a career in that sector?
Great question. I think that the pandemic has certainly shone a light on the importance of the work of community service workers. I think it's also really shone a light on how damaging insecure work is. We turn on the news every day at 11 o'clock. I think 11 o'clock New South Wales broadly shuts down as everyone runs to the television to watch the Premier's press conference and find out, how many cases, hospitalisations, where's the spread, what's the new restrictions that are being brought in. There's a few constants throughout all of that. One of the constants is that there are essential workers who need to continue going to work, that they have to keep going to work to be able to keep the rest of us safe. They have to make sure that we have safe, reliable water supply. They have to make sure that other essential workers can catch a train or a bus to be able to get to work. They have to make sure that people who are living with violence, that women who are experiencing violence, needing to leave violence, have a safe place to go, have services to wrap around and support them, that people with disability can continue to receive the vital supports that they receive every single day. So one of the constants, these are the workers who continue having to go to work. One of the other constants is that the alarmingly high transmission rates that we're hearing about are largely not because of naughty individuals who are not following the restrictions, although there's some of that goes on. largely, and Dr. Kerry Chant says this every day, we're talking about workplace transmissions. We're talking about workers who have to keep going to work because their work is so important and because society will grind to a halt without them. That while the rest of us are able to take comfort in sheltering in place, they are brave and they continue to turn up. Supermarket workers who continue to turn up for little more than the minimum wage. What we consider an essential worker, I think that definition has greatly changed during the COVID pandemic. So I think it's changed a lot in terms of community perception around the value of a lot of these service industries and the value of community services. That's a fantastic thing. I hope, and it's certainly my job and it's the job of unionists all around the country, I hope that we are doing our part to make sure the community is changing their views and talking more about the importance of secure work, that people, every single worker should have the security and the dignity to know that if they're unwell, they can stay home and they won't lose pay. And they won't have to make a decision about whether they can pay the rent or put food on the table. But if they're unwell, that they can stay home and have the dignity and the decency of paid sick leave, of paid annual leave, of knowing what income they're going to receive, not worrying about when the next shift is, whether they'll be able to pay a bill. So I do think that the community are becoming more aware of how important these jobs are. It's certainly become more of a dialogue that we all share with each other. It's definitely taking over the front pages in the newspaper, and that's a good thing. And I think for anybody who's considering a career in these industries, there can be nothing better than knowing that the role that you play changes other people's lives. I know sometimes people say, I want to have a job that helps people. Well, it's more than helping. It's making a difference. It's knowing that actually people's lives would not be as secure, as safe, as meaningful, as dignified if you didn't go to work every single day. You deserve to be paid properly for that. You deserve to be recognised properly for that important work, but also the satisfaction of knowing that you're changing the world and you're making a difference in someone else's lives. Pretty rewarding.
Have there been any times where others have tried to silence your voice? If so, how did you respond? And what advice would you give to young people who feel like their voices are being shut down? What are some steps young people can take to assert themselves?
That's a wonderful question. Yes, I have definitely. I think it's a daily event. I work in a political environment, so of course there are people who disagree with me, who want to silence me. There's also sometimes people who agree with me who want to silence me, but that happens. That happens to every single one of us in our lives. I think first off, being aware of it and thinking whether it's fair is really important, and going, actually, no, you know what? What I have to say is worth hearing. Having confidence in knowing that what it is that you have to contribute is valuable is important. Also taking heart and knowing that if you have this burning desire to share, to contribute a particular idea, then there's probably somebody else out there who's got the same burning desire to contribute it or to hear it from someone else. What I would say in a kind of practical tip on how to ensure that you're able to have your voice and have your voice heard is look for allies. If you're in a group setting, think about who else probably hasn't had an opportunity to speak as much. Who else perhaps, gives you that indication that when you do speak up, they might agree with you, if they're nodding their head, if they're turning their body towards you. And make sure you have more than one bite at the cherry. It's not like you didn't get to say it in that moment, the moment's gone, you'll never get to say it again. Your wonderful idea can't be shared. Your protest cannot be heard or raised. You may not have it in that exact moment, in that exact opportunity, but do the follow-up work afterwards. Go to the people who you think, you know what, I don't think that they felt as satisfied as I did. Sure, maybe nobody spoke up, but I think there are a few people who shuffled around a bit in their chair at that point. They might agree. I'm going to go have a side conversation with them and say, hey, I didn't like it when that happened. I wanted to say something about this. And then make a plan and be a collectivist and speak up together. It's a lot easier to speak up when you know others might be trying to silence you. It's a lot easier to speak up when you know that you're speaking up on behalf of someone else and that you're going to be supported by someone else. It's a very common practice in feminism for women to take deliberate efforts to amplify one another. So that means echoing what somebody else has said, not making them be the only person who's kind of out there on the limb and saying, actually, I really agree with that important point that my sister over here has made. So on one hand, I'd say, if you've got something to say, don't be silenced. Like, do find who else might be able to back you in. Don't worry if you didn't get to say it at that time, you can say it another time, but also be that person who amplifies the voice of someone else. If you see someone who's trying to raise a matter that's really important to them, even if you don't agree with it, make sure everyone gets a voice. Make sure that you're the person who sits in a room and thinks, hang on a moment, that person over there hasn't spoken yet, and I'm going to make sure they get an opportunity. Or this person over here has spoken, and that must have been difficult for them. It must have been a bit daunting, and I'm going to be the person who speaks up now and says, I really agree with what they said, or maybe I don't agree with what they said, but I really applaud you for having the bravery to say it. And I think when you start to be that person, then other people will reciprocate it to you. And that's the best way to make sure that you get to have your voice and that everybody gets to have their voice. Because tell you what, a conversation where only one person's doing the talking, it's a pretty dull conversation.
You obviously work, or you're the secretary of the the ASU for the ACT and New South Wales. So, and you've got, kind of a role in and a history in trade unionism. But we've seen, in the past that unions have kind of historically been at the forefront of many movements of social change. They're the reason we have the 8-hour working day, penalty rates, and a minimum wage. They've been heavily involved in movements across the world, for women's rights and desegregation. And, we've seen those amazing leap forwards taken, but we've also seen in the past 40 years, union membership in Australia declining significantly. Even in 1992, union membership was 40%, and it's fallen to just 14% of the workforce in official ABS statistics that were released last year. In that same time period, we've seen stagnating wage growth. We've seen a rise in income inequality and increasing levels of housing insecurity. And many employers, across the world have resisted the influence of unions, and many people attack them as an anachronism in today's society. We see, most recently Amazon's attempts in Alabama to shut down workers, or their successful attempts to shut down a push by workers to unionize in an Amazon warehouse. So do you think that unions are seeing a decline in relevance, or can they still play a role in modern Australian society? And what would your message to young people who are kind of unsure about joining a union be?
There's so much in that question, and it's a really thoughtful one, so thank you. There's a difference between relevance and power. Exactly as you pointed out, Daniel, when we see a decrease in union membership and union density in society, we also see a decrease in justice around wages. When we see a decrease in unionism, we see an increase in inequality. And that means that union relevance hasn't decreased at all. In fact, we're more relevant than ever. What's really important, though, is that everyone does their bit to be part of building a union and building that power to address those inequalities. I'd start at considering what is a union. Often when we talk about unions and even the framing of the question, it almost sounds like unions it's a building. It's a building that I, as a secretary of that union, happen to work in, and that is what the union. That the union is organised labour. There are over 15,000 ASU members in New South Wales and the ACT. What is the ASU? It's those 15,000 workers who came together and said, we're going to be a collective. We're going to support one another. We're all going to contribute, and we're going to make our work and our working lives better. So unions are incredibly relevant. We do have a lot more to do. We can see that when we don't have the same strength in our union movements, then we don't make the same kind of social progress. And I don't think anyone can look around the world right now on what's happening and not see the desperate need to grow and strengthen our unions. Interestingly, a lot of research has been conducted into this, and people who aren't in unions aren't generally opposed to unions. They think, oh, it's great. I'm really glad they're there. Thank goodness someone's doing it. But don't necessarily see that it's their role to be part of a union. And so what can young people do is be part of a union. be a collectivist, be the person who makes that commitment and says, I want to contribute to making society more fair and more just. Exactly as you said, Daniel. Yes, it's about the industrial rights at a workplace, what we're paid, where we work, how clean are our amenities, what's my roster look like? Yes, it's absolutely about that. But it is about big social change. I'm leading the union that's been campaigning for universal access to paid family violence leave. 15,000 workers in New South Wales have been leading that campaign for an entitlement that will extend to millions of workers. They're not doing that for themselves because they want an entitlement. They're leading this campaign because they say one woman a week is killed by a current or former intimate partner in Australia. That's not acceptable. And that often that happens because women don't have the ability to take time off work, to continue receiving income, to make safe arrangements, to be able to leave violence, to be able to access supports and services. So in our circumstance, 15,000 workers who are members of the Australian Services Union are saying, we want to be part of making society better because we want to end gendered violence. That's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. That's what changes the world. That's where Medicare comes from. That's where superannuation comes from. Exactly as you said, the union movement's played a pivotal role in the anti-apartheid movement, in the struggle for women's rights. In fact, green bands, we wouldn't even have the rocks there in Sydney, the rocks that we all know and love and we feel very strongly about as our history. They wouldn't be there if it weren't for unionised workers saying together that they wanted to have a better, a fairer and a more decent society. So I would say to every single young person who's considering what's their role is, if not you, then who? 15,000 workers have made a decision to say, well, I'm going to be a member of the Australian Services Union and I'm going to be part of making work better and working lives better for every single Australian. And that's a small thing that every single one of us can do.
In recent years, we've seen women from all countries come out to tell their stories as part of the #MeToo movement. What do you think has changed in recent years to make society actually take the voices of women seriously? And what can young people do to support the feminist movement and help empower women in Australia and across the globe?
What can people do? Well, the number one thing that not just young people, but every single person can do is believe women. It's incredibly difficult for people to say, well, me too, and to share their experiences. And when we ask what's changed, why are women coming out and saying, well, enough, and I'm going to share my experiences? It's being absolutely fed up. But one of the reasons that women have, because women have been fed up for a very, very long time. When over 50 years ago, when feminists took over 2 abandoned buildings in Glebe and spray painted on the wall, safe refuge for women, and opened Elsie's Women's Refuge, the first women's refuge in Australia. They were fed up. They were fed up when they did that. So women have been fed up for a very long time. Since the suffragettes, women have been fed up for a very, very long time, being told that we didn't have a right to a vote. Women have been fed up for a long time. What's changing is a willing decision to believe women. For far too long, we have based our dialogue on the concern to protect those who are accused, not to send a very strong message that we believe women. So my number one suggestion would be, make sure you believe women, make sure you assure all the women in your lives that they are believed and that they are valued. And sisters, know that you are believed, that you are seen and that you are valued. But again, it's about being part of the actions that are taking place. When there's a women's march, go along, be part of the march. There's nothing I love more. I go to International Women's Day every year. I've always gone to International Women's Day. I love marching on International Women's Day with all of my sister comrades. It fills my heart with joy. There's some anger, there's some sorrow, there's some joy, there's some celebration. It's wonderful. And the thing that means the most to me is I love it when you're walking down the street and there's somebody who's standing on the side of the street who applauds you. So you don't have to be the person in the march. You can say, I'm making a decision that I want to be an ally. I want to be the person who stands on the side of the road and claps and says, I'm glad that you're doing this. Because for some of us, we go because we love it. And, you know, it's feminist Christmas for us to get to go and march on International Women's Day. For others, it's very daunting. It might be their first International Women's Day. It might be the fact that they've come along and they don't know how others in their lives are going to respond. Be that person who makes the eye contact and who applauds you and says, I'm glad that you're here and that you're doing this. That's how we can actually change how women are valued and how women are given the space to have a say. The other thing I'd say is, if it's not working for your sisters, speak up and demand that the system changes to accommodate you. Don't change to accommodate the system. I know in my job, when I started in the role as secretary of the union, there was only one other woman who was the secretary of the union. And meetings were often scheduled for, you know, before work in the morning or after work in the evening. And I'm not afraid of doing the hard yards and putting the hours in. I have children. And when I'm dropping kids off at school and picking kids up at school, that excludes me from meetings. But rather than kind of be frustrated about it or say, you know, how do I change my life to fit with the system? I just said, that doesn't work for me. And by the way, I've got a lot to say, and the things that I've got to say are pretty valuable and they're worth hearing. So we're going to need to move when those meetings are on so that I get to participate. And believe it or not, it wasn't met with objections. Nobody kind of went, oh, how dare you say that? No, that's terribly inconvenient for us. We aren't possibly. Everyone went, oh, okay, really good point. Glad that you raised it. Yep, okay, we better move when those meetings are on. You're right, that's not okay. So sisters, if the system's not working for you, you don't have to change yourself to match the system. You change the system to match you. And that means not just will you benefit, but every other woman who's going to come along with you or after you is going to benefit from that. And in fact, I think you'll find there'll be a lot more women who'll be able to enter those spaces because of that.
We've also seen the recent exposure of a horrific culture of sexual harassment in Parliament House, as well as allegations of rape brought against the Cabinet Minister, Christian Porter. How can we hold men in power accountable for their actions and ensure workplaces across the country are safe and free from this kind of culture?
It's a really complex question. Sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, gender abuse, they are all incredibly complex issues. And there are a whole lot of complex solutions that need to be implemented. But things that every single one of us can do, it comes back to believing women. It comes back to making sure that women are in those spaces. Decisions that are made about how do we have a safe space for women that don't include women's voices aren't going to make good decisions. So it's really important that in every decision-making forum, everyone, not just decision-making forums about women and about autonomous business, every single decision-making space needs to have diversity in representation, and it needs to have women. And that's an important way that we start to make the right decisions, that we start to make sure that the systems that are being put in place are the systems that believe women, that make safe environments for women.
Talking about, you know, future leaders and in this kind of theme of our Future Leaders Week and, you know, kind of young people making a change in the world, I know there are, you know, many things that inspire people, but for you, what is the kind of one thing? Is there one thing, or is it kind of just a multitude of things that inspired you to kind of push for social justice and advocate, you know, for causes which are important for you? And what advice would you give to, you know, younger people who are passionate about something and who want to advocate for change in the world?
It's funny, I have complex feelings about the term leadership when I apply it to myself. I guess because I never set out to be a leader. So I didn't say, oh, I want a role that is a leadership role. And I felt very strongly about particular matters. I feel very strongly about unionism. I feel very strongly about feminism. And my advice would be, if you want to be a leader, that's a wonderful thing. It's an absolutely precious thing. Make sure you're doing it about something you absolutely care about, because you won't be a very good leader if it's about being a leader for leadership's sake. You will make a wonderful leader if you are there to lead on something that you care so passionately about, that you will inspire others to care just as much as you care, that all of those systems that can make it hard when you're in leadership, when you can be really challenged, when you can be really confronted, when somebody does try to silence you, and it happens a lot when you're a leader, or does try to argue with you and tell you you're wrong and set you on a different course. It is so much easier to deal with all of those challenges when you're dealing with them because you believe so passionately in what it is that you're trying to achieve, in the cause that you are there to lead for. It can be a social movement. I hope it's a social movement. I hope it's a social movement because social movements need absolutely passionate people. And God, we need some really strong social movements. We've got some wonderful, strong social movements, but we need more passionate people absolutely every single day. It doesn't have to be, though, a social movement that you're passionate about. It might be something else that you're really passionate about. I don't care if it's my son, who's 8, he's incredibly passionate about Pokemon. Now, if he could pursue being a leader in the world of Pokemon, I tell you, he would be absolutely wonderful at it because he loves about it. He cares so much about it. And that's what he should pursue. Pursue something you love. Pursue something that you care about. And if you are driven by that passion, then you will be a very strong leader because you won't be able to be silenced, because you will feel the responsibility to speak up because you're there to change the world. And everyone is relying on you to have a strong voice and to raise that voice and to use that voice. Then you won't be challenged in those ways. Well, you'll be challenged, but you'll be certainly able to overcome those challenges. So my advice is don't lead for leadership's sake. Lead because you love and you care and you are driven, and there is a fire that burns in you so brightly about what it is that you want to lead. Then you will be the best leader possible.
What's one thing in the world that you hope to see change in the next few years? And what are some steps that need to be taken to achieve that goal?
This is a really cruel question because we don't just need one change in the world, do we? It's where I feel like I need to give an amalgamation answer. I want genuine gender equality. So that means we need to change a lot of things to have genuine gender equality. It's not acceptable that the fastest growing cohort of people facing homelessness are ageing women. Women who've raised families, who've contributed in the workforce their whole life. But because we don't have equal pay, because the superannuation system doesn't actually recognise all of the unpaid labour that women do in raising children and caring for ageing family members, women are retiring in poverty. They are retiring in poverty. They are sleeping in cars. If we have genuine gender equality, it means we do have to fix the superannuation system. It means we have to end the way that our society is built on the back of the working poor in essential service industries. Female-dominated industries, aged care, childcare, education, healthcare, disability services, community services, essential industries that are female-dominated, that are low-paid, that are dependent on awards, not enterprise agreements that lift the playing field, that lift the floor for everybody. We have to fix a very broken industrial system so that entire industries can be properly valued for the contribution that they make in society. The fact that you can earn more working, stacking shelves at a supermarket than caring for our aged in the aged care industry, that's a blight on every single one of us. So if I could change anything, I would have genuine gender equality, but that means fixing the industrial relations system, achieving real equal pay, which means it doesn't matter if two people sitting next to each other are being paid the same. It matters that the work that you're doing is valuable and you are paid equitably for that. It means lifting whole industries. No woman should retire into poverty. We need a proper age pension that is decent, that is dignified. We need decent, dignified superannuation system that rewards unpaid labour. And we know that if we have women having proper financial and economic security and independence, that's going to be one of the key drivers that reduces gendered violence. that reduces the terrible rates of sexual and domestic violence that women in Australia are exposed to. So if I could change anything, that's what I would do. And I think it requires an entire movement of feminists. So I hope that there are a lot of feminists who are going to be coming through the ranks, as I'm sure there will be. And it requires a lot of allies, which are our brothers who are going to be the people who will line the street on International Women's Day, who will clap when women, take to the street and raise their voice and say, I believe you and I support you and I'm here to back you in. That's what's going to change.
Now, just one final question to kind of finish us off here and kind of end on a note that I guess, might give some inspiration for people, younger people listening to this. As we start seeing, more people from Generation Z kind of enter the workforce and kind of be able to, be in this position where they have the ability to make change in society, do you have high hopes for what Generation Z might be able to accomplish? And is there anything different about Generation Z that you think makes them unique or, uniquely poised to kind of achieve this goal of changing the world?
I have wonderful hopes for Generation Z. I was really excited. I just have to put this out there because it's something I recently found out and it's excited me no end and I want to boast a little bit. I'm a millennial. Okay, so I made the cutoff by 1 year. So when I'm talking about Gen Z, I'm talking to my sister and brother folk here. I'm not old, I'm a millennial. Okay, so I have wonderful hopes for Generation Z. You've actually been through some challenges that no other generation in living memory has had to go through. Maybe my grandparents have, but really other generations have not had to go through the same kind of struggles that Generation Z have been to. And I think that makes you incredibly resilient and resourceful generation. You have fabulous resilience that you find in each other. I think that you've done a wonderful job of being able to, in a world that's completely disconnected, find connection and build and maintain connection. That's a very valuable thing. In the union movement, we call that organising. And organising is where we find our power, and that's how we are actually able to change the world. So I think Generation Z has been through some stuff that others have not had to. There are not many people in your generation who have now experienced any kind of insecure work, working, in casual jobs, working without leave entitlements. If you get sick, it's not like you call in sick and you keep getting paid. More expensive education. Like if you're going to be able to undertake an education, you've got to really want to undertake that education. You've got to climb over barriers that have been put in front of you by other generations, not by yourselves. You've got to climb over barriers, unfair barriers and hurdles that have been put in front of you to access the same kind of education and healthcare. And good luck having the same access to housing and affordable housing. None of those barriers are of your making, but you as a generation have been able to climb over those and will continue to be able to climb over those. I think that makes you more resourceful and more resilient than we've seen for many, many generations, including my own, definitely. So I think that puts you in a fantastic position. I would say this, if not you, then who? It's not acceptable to always look at a problem and say somebody should do something about that. Generation Z has the power to be the generation that says, well, it's us. We are going to be the generation that is the somebody who's going to do something about that. And the something that we're going to be able to do is draw upon that resilience, draw upon that resourcefulness, draw upon that connectedness that you have innovated, that you've created with each other, and say that you're going to be a united generation. Be collectivists. In a world that has done everything it can to force you to be an individualist, to force you to think only of yourself, to compete for absolutely everything. Life is a competition. That is what has been forced onto you, not by your generation, but by all the generations that didn't have to go through that themselves. Be the generation that says, no, get stuffed. We're not going to be the individualists as much as you've tried to make us be it. We're going to be the collectivists. Somebody needs to do something about this. It's going to be us. If not you, then who? Then I think Generation Z can absolutely do it.
Thank you so much for being with us here, Natalie. And I think that was just a great note to end on because, it's kind of a message for hope. And I mean, if to sum up kind of your message for Generation Z, would there be kind of one sentence that you would hope would give some inspiration to people, younger people looking to make change, just kind of a guiding, light almost to kind of keep with you? Would there be one sentence?
No, I don't, because it would probably be not particular. You're looking for something uplifting, Daniel, but kind of what I want to say is it has to be you. It has to. We've got all of our hopes in you. And, big shoulders, guys, broad shoulders, but you can absolutely do it because look at what you have done so far. It's true. You are the generation that's dealing with the least equitable access to education, to decent employment, to housing, to services. The fact that you've got through what you've got through means you absolutely are the people who can do it.
So thank you so much for being here with us, Natalie. And I think it was really great talking to you. And, I'm sure everyone listening to this video, sure to get, at least something like a nugget of, gold out of this interview, because I think you said some really great things. And I'm really looking forward to be able to share this with people, students across the state. From all of us, we wish you the best, going forward into the future. And thank you so much again for being here.
Thanks so much for having us along. And if I can leave everybody with one thought, if not you, then who? Every great social change may have had a wonderful leader who's been incredibly inspirational, generally a fabulous orator, but the actual change has always been won by a movement behind that leader. And so whether you feel like you're the leader, the great orator, the person who can get the roster put together so that everyone's hitting the phone tree, whatever it is, you have a role to, but we're laughing at the phone, aren't we? We're laughing at the fact that I mimed it like an old person on the rotary phone. That's true, it's fair. But every great change that has been achieved, social change in history, has been achieved by a movement of people. And so that means we actually need tens and hundreds of thousands of people to change the world. So every single one of you has a role to play.